you're ready.
Hey, welcome to a new edition of Throwing Shade. So, one of the things that I wanted to talk about this morning, the whole idea behind Throwing Shade, it's a podcast that what I'm going to try to do is examine the mosaic that is America. This wonderful melting pot of all these different cultures and ideas, and quite honestly, shades of people. Now, it's unique to our country if you look at some of the largest populous countries in the world. China is somewhat monolithic in terms of its diversity as far as race is concerned, as is India. And but in America, you get all these wonderful shades, this tapestry that we create because of our differences. I truly believe it's the strength of the country. So I wanted to move from some of the topics we've been covering to a new area, but the fact that the election keeps dragging on and the violence that we've seen in Washington D.C., Kentucky, and other parts of the country, it's forced me to continue to speak to this issue, even though I've tried to move past that. So one of the things that about this time in the country that is very difficult is this idea of white privilege. Now, anytime I say that, I always get a pushback from working class white Americans who don't feel privileged at all. And they're correct, because that white privilege isn't this basket of additional amenities that you get. I guess the best way to describe it, and this is reading from a text and an article, white privilege is really a misnomer. It's not an additional basket of rights, but it is that you are culturally inoculated. In other words, meaning you can live and die as a white American and never ask any other culture essentially for anything. So you're culturally inoculated from asking permission. So white privilege is the idea that you're culturally inoculated from asking permission. I know that sounds like a mouthful, but let me give you an example. In the area of education, for instance, there is a $63 billion difference between areas of the country that are predominantly white and areas of the country that are predominantly black. And what that means essentially is not only do they not have the same resources, but often people's attitudes are injected into the educational system. In other words, people bring their preconceived notions into an area where those things should be absent. But teachers are people. And so there are occasions where teachers allow what they perceive to be true about a student manifest itself in grades. Studies show that when young black children are in elementary school, in kindergarten, all the way through the 8th grade, they test at the equivalent of their white counterparts. In other words, they all start out with an equal degree of intellect. However, from the 8th grade until black students graduate, they actually unlearn. The high school system in the country pushes black students to regression, making it harder to get into good institutions. And because of the inequities in the system, universities have attempted to mitigate that damage by offering affirmative action programs. And immediately, as I said, working class whites who feel like they don't have an advantage cry an idea of reverse discrimination, which is a topic for another day. When what is actually happening is affirmative action is an attempt to mitigate the inequities that exist in the system. The point is that for white students, there isn't a need to mitigate. and they never have to ask permission. The very people they're asking permission to mitigate the damage of an unequal system, they have to go, as an African American, you have to go to the white community to ask them to mitigate damage that they have done. A system they've created to be unequal, you're asking that same person, that same group essentially, to fix a problem that they've created. So the privilege is, as white Americans, that's something you are culturally inoculated from ever asking permission. Housing. If you try to purchase a home, even in places in West Virginia, whether it's Chicago, anywhere, everyone knows, and it's as quiet as it is kept, as that it is difficult for African American people to buy, or black people to buy into a neighborhood that is predominantly white. People tend to like to live with people who look like them. That isn't the problem. The problem is in order to purchase there, black Americans have to ask permission. That is not an element or an issue that would ever be a portion or an idea that white Americans would ever have to deal with. In childcare, in the same way, the inequities in childcare, infant mortality, these are all borne out statistically. So, white privilege isn't an idea that you get a different basket of rights, that somehow that you're born into any idea of royalty. White privilege is essentially the simple idea that you're culturally inoculated from ever asking permission. And what I'm not. I'm just throwing shade. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next week.